What happens when the life you've built with someone is suddenly shattered by betrayal? In the quiet town of Killeen, Texas, a crime narrative unfolds that explores the delicate balance between love and trust, and the devastating consequences when that balance is disrupted. Sergeant Michael Harris had just returned home after months of serving his country overseas, filled with hope and excitement for the future he envisioned with his wife, Diane. The night was calm, the stars twinkling softly in the sky, as he imagined the warmth of her embrace and the joy of being reunited. But as he stepped through the door of their home, he was unaware that the life he cherished was about to collapse in ways he could never have anticipated. This is a story of love, loss, and the haunting echoes of choices made in moments of despair. It invites us to reflect on the fragility of relationships and the profound impact of our actions, reminding us that even in the most serene settings, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. As we journey through this narrative, we will explore the complexities of human emotions and the consequences that ripple through lives forever changed. If you appreciate true crime stories like this one, be sure to subscribe to True Crime Atlas. Join us as we delve deeper into the mysteries and realities of crime and uncover the stories that shape our understanding of justice and humanity. What do you do when the very moment you step off that airplane, the life you believed you were returning to is already gone? The late-night sky above Killeen, Texas, offered Sergeant Michael Harris a blanket of stars and a comforting breeze, but none of that could prepare him for the darkness he would encounter inside his own home. He had been away for nearly 10 months, stationed overseas, serving a country whose ideals he carried in his heart. As he left the military base earlier that day, visions of a joyful reunion with his wife, Diane, filled his mind. He pictured the soft lamplight in their living room, the way she would rush into his arms, that hushed exclamation, "You're home early!" He rehearsed a whole conversation in his head. He even planned to pick up her favorite flowers, pink carnations, on the drive from the base to their modest home. But the florist he usually visited had closed for the night, and so he arrived empty-handed, though his heart was brimming with anticipation. Love can be so hopeful, can it not? He slipped the key into the lock and turned it carefully, wanting to preserve the surprise. The front door gave way without resistance, revealing a quiet living room still bathed in the faint glow from a single standing lamp in the corner. The partial light softened the edges of their worn furniture. The couch where they used to curl up and watch late-night shows, the small coffee table where they made big plans for the future, start a family, buy a new car, maybe eventually move closer to Diane's parents in Houston. He paused, waiting for her to appear, for the moment she would rush in, eyes wide, to greet him. But there was only silence, and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Without switching on another lamp, he set his duffel bag on the floor. A subtle foreboding began to take shape in his chest. He called out her name, whispered at first, "Diane?" No answer came. A question flitted through his mind. Maybe she's asleep? But the house felt oddly unsettled, as though someone had left in a hurry, or was in the middle of something they didn't want interrupted. In the soft glow of the lamp, he saw a half-finished cup of tea or coffee on the small side table. Steam no longer rose, but the drink still looked warm. He ran his hand across its rim. It was lukewarm. The sense that something was off tightened like a knot in his chest. A single rhetorical question rose. Could someone else be here? He moved with controlled caution, the kind learned in desert combat zones, where any misstep could bring danger. Down the short hallway, past the row of framed pictures that told their love story, some from their wedding day in a tiny chapel out near Diane's family ranch, some from the short honeymoon they managed in Galveston, and others capturing everyday moments of them grilling burgers in the backyard. Each photograph showed two people beaming, filled with that early marriage hope. Wasn't that the promise they made each other? To always be faithful, to always find a way? In those final days of his deployment, he had tried to brush aside the nagging thoughts about how distance might wear on a marriage. After all, Diane was a devoted wife. Everyone who knew her said she was sweet, empathetic, a warm presence in any room. But in the late, restless nights overseas, he would hear rumors from fellow soldiers about how time and loneliness could unravel even the strongest bonds. She believed in love. He believed in determination. He told himself that if they believed enough, their life together would remain unbreakable. As he approached the bedroom door, Michael's heart drummed so loudly he thought it might echo off those thin walls. He heard a noise, soft voices, maybe a muffled conversation. Could Diane be on a late-night phone call, trying not to wake the neighbors? The possibility almost calmed him, but then he realized there was another voice mixed with hers, a deeper tone. Instinctively, he reached for the handgun strapped securely in its holster on his belt. Soldiers returning home often carry their sidearms for a short while, especially if they haven't fully processed that transition from war zone to suburban neighborhood. The door stood ajar, a slice of darkness that suggested both invitation and warning. He wondered if intruders had broken in, if Diane was in jeopardy. The urge to protect her outweighed his caution, and he nudged the door open. Then he saw the shapes in bed. Diane was not under attack. She was intertwined with another figure. The faint outline of sweaty skin and tangled sheets clarified what was happening. Tears pricked at the back of Michael's eyes before he even realized he was crying. He flicked on the hall light, any pretense of stealth gone, revealing Pastor Daniel lying there beside her. Pastor Daniel, an upright, charismatic man from the local church Diane had been attending while Michael was away. Michael recognized that face from Sunday services, potluck dinners, community gatherings. He realized in a dizzying instant that everything he trusted was collapsing in front of him. A wave of betrayal and heartbreak crashed over him like the desert storm he had once lived through. The rational part of his mind wanted to step back, to demand an explanation, to shout or scream or weep, but the betrayal sank in deeper and faster than reason. For an agonizing moment he froze, watching them scramble to cover themselves, Diane stammering his name, eyes wide, Daniel struggling to find words, to shield himself with the sheets. A swirl of frantic apologies flew about the room. "Michael, I'm sorry. It's not what it looks like. We didn't mean..." But what do words mean in that instant, when everything is unraveling? Michael's pulse pounded in his ears, drowning all other sound. Something inside him shattered. By the time he realized what he was doing, the gun was raised, pointed at the two people who had toppled his entire world. Diane's voice rang out again, "Don't!" But he squeezed the trigger. In the hush of that moment, the muzzle flashes lit the bedroom in a stark, pulsing glow. One shot, then another, maybe a third. His ears rang with the echoes, leaving him momentarily deaf to Diane's last gasp and Daniel's final moan. Night fell silent again, except for Michael's own ragged breathing. He felt the burning sensation of tears on his cheeks. He believed he would do anything to keep Diane safe, but how could he protect her from the bullet of his own heartbreak and rage? In that stolen second, he had become a perpetrator of his own personal war, one triggered by a sight too painful to bear. She believed in second chances. He believed in immediate justice, and neither stance could survive those muzzle flashes. Disbelief hit like a physical blow to his chest. He lowered the gun, struggling to steady himself against the doorframe. Diane was lying on the bed that used to be their intimate sanctuary, her nightgown stained red. Daniel was half fallen off the mattress, eyes still open in stunned horror. Michael's mind reeled. searching for any solution other than the reality at hand. Then panic set in. He stared at the bodies, the fresh blood. He rushed around the house in a frenzy. He yanked an old tarpaulin from the garage, something they used to cover furniture during a painting project. With shaking hands, he dragged them, the two lovers, out of the bedroom and into the backyard. It was a stiflingly warm Texas night, the kind where no breeze seemed to exist, and sweat dripped down Michael's temples, mingling with his tears. He kept thinking, "What have I done?" But the question offered no comfort. Covering them with that tarp beneath a tall pecan tree, he felt each second stretch into an unbearable eternity. Under that starry Texas sky, he glanced at the limp arm extending from under the covering, a familiar hand he had once held with tenderness. His stomach churned with nausea and a wave of profound regret. He looked at the door leading back into the house, half expecting to see some monstrous figure behind him, but the only monster present was the reflection of what he had just become. In the swirl of shock, guilt, and confusion, he tried to formulate a plan. Hide everything, run, make it look like a burglary. But a rational voice inside him, one that had seen the consequences of panic in times of war, whispered that none of those plans would hold. This was not an enemy outpost. He could not simply call for an airlift to whisk him away from the carnage. Perhaps if he left right now, if he burned the clothes, if he found some deserted stretch of highway and kept driving toward the Mexican border. He stumbled back into the house, stripped off his bloody shirt, tossed it into a plastic bag. He looked in the mirror above the sink and hardly recognized the reflection. A wildness had taken hold of his eyes, the same wildness he had once seen in soldiers stuck in the horrors of combat. As he stood there, the phone rang. A jolt of fear shot through his body. He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced out the front window and saw the glow of blue and red lights approaching. Maybe the neighbors heard the shots. Maybe a passing patrol had seen the muzzle flashes. The reality set in. In Texas, especially around military communities, law enforcement responds quickly to disturbances. Judging by the sound of sirens drawing near, he had mere minutes before the house was swarmed with police. He believed he could run, but he believed also that no distance on earth could ever erase what he'd just done. He sprinted for his car, left the front door ajar, and nearly slipped in his haste to peel out of the driveway. Tires squealed, headlights knifed through the darkness. The intense thud of his heartbeat pulsed in his ears. On those suburban streets, he raced past mailboxes and quiet, identical houses that all pined for a peaceful night. He pictured them jolted by police lights, neighbors spilling onto lawns, wanting to know who had shattered their tranquil bubble. But the cops were quick. In the rearview mirror, he saw their lights, close enough that he could see the break of each strobe. Desperation twisted in his gut. He considered making a turn onto an old farm road that led out of town. But just as he was about to swerve, a patrol car cut him off. The final standoff came on a side street near an abandoned lot. He screeched to a halt, the car behind him doing the same. He flung the door open and stumbled out, raising his hands, muzzle pointed downward. The memory of the still warm bodies he had left behind set him trembling so violently he couldn't speak at first. The officers trained their weapons on him, shouting commands in that clipped, urgent tone. He could barely process the words. All he knew was that the gun was still in his waistband, and he needed them to see he wasn't going to fight anymore. This war was over in every sense. He removed his sidearm slowly, setting it on the pavement, and sank to his knees. He felt the cold steel cuffs lock around his wrists. No tears came at that moment, only a numb acceptance of his fate. In the days that followed, the people of Killeen spoke about nothing else. Rumors and swirling half-truths spread. He caught her cheating. She was with the pastor. He lost his mind. She must have led him on. He was battling PTSD. The gossip served as a coping mechanism, a way for neighbors to interpret the confusion of how a once-loving couple, admired for their commitment, could end in such violent horror. Some folks placed blame squarely on Diane, labeling her an unfaithful woman. Others pointed to Michael's training and the possibility of trauma from his deployments, suggesting that maybe he had been on a hair trigger. A handful of parishioners were stunned to learn that Pastor Daniel, rumored to be an upstanding man of God, had participated in an affair. It was a puzzle with pieces that no one fully possessed. After the indictment, Michael languished in Bell County Jail, awaiting trial. Investigators meticulously processed the crime scene. The shell casings inside that small bedroom, the footprints in blood, the tarp in the backyard with its grim secret. Under the blazing Texas sun, the images of the victims lying beneath that tattered plastic covering were captured by forensic photographers. Diane's relatives traveled from Houston to identify her body, hearts broken by a betrayal that was overshadowed only by the magnitude of this tragedy. Pastor Daniel's congregation passed around a mixture of sorrow and fury. Some felt betrayed by their spiritual leader. Others pitied him, thinking he was just a flawed man. Then there were those who found it impossible to reconcile his compassion in the pulpit with his moral failure behind closed doors. Months slipped by, a slow-burn tension building toward the day Michael would stand before a judge and jury. His defense team questioned him repeatedly about his psychological state, about the immediate trigger for that violence. They toyed with presenting an insanity plea, or at least a diminished capacity argument. But Michael refused to say he hadn't intended to fire. He just kept repeating in a hollow voice, "I didn't want to do it, but I did." If you listened closely, you could hear echoes of heartbreak twisted with guilt, as though he was struggling to wrestle with a demon that had materialized and vanished all in the same night. The media latched on to the lurid details. Soldier returns from deployment, murders wife and pastor in shocking act of rage. They used dramatic headlines that sold papers and garnered clicks, while behind those headlines were real families shattered. Real heartbreak that would linger for years. The day court convened, a throng of reporters and curious onlookers swarmed the courthouse steps. Inside, the air was thick with the somber realization that 2 lives were gone, and a once honorable soldier might spend the rest of his days in a prison cell. Michael, now thinner, paler, and deeply haunted, stood at the defense table. His posture was stiff, his eyes cast downward much of the time. Diane's family members filled the gallery, as did some from Pastor Daniel's congregation, all of them unsure whether to direct their anger at Michael or to let sorrow wash over them. Opening statements from the prosecution painted a picture of a deliberate act. He chose to open fire. He could have walked away, but he aimed at them and pulled the trigger. They emphasized that he had the training and discipline to handle high-stress situations. If anyone should have known how to restrain himself, it was a trained soldier. The defense countered that this was a crime of passion, a moment of emotional devastation that overwhelmed Michael's rational mind. They brought up his clean record, his service, hinting at the potential mental toll of warfare, though Michael refused to blame combat stress. Witness after witness recounted the couple's dynamic. A neighbor testified that Diane had seemed lonely, relieved to have a sympathetic ear in Pastor Daniel. A friend testified that Michael once confided he was worried about Diane's faithfulness, but that he tried to dismiss his fears as unfounded. The medical examiner described the bullet trajectories in clinical, unflinching detail. Each description felt like an unstoppable wave crashing over Michael. Typically stoic in the face of adversity, he found himself trembling at the memory of the exact shots fired in that dark bedroom. The prosecution described the methodical approach of dragging the bodies to the backyard, They showed photographs that made the jury grimace, including a shot of a pale arm protruding from beneath the tarp. The defense argued that the act of covering them demonstrated little more than a panicked response, not rational premeditation. When Michael took the stand, the courtroom fell into a nearly reverent hush. He spoke softly, forcing his voice aloud where otherwise it might have choked. "I loved my wife," he said, "and when I walked in, and I saw that betrayal, I don't know what came over me. It was like the gun I pulled the trigger before I could think. I wish I had been stronger. I wish I had left the room. I can't take it back now." His voice broke. Echoing in that still chamber was not an excuse but a lament. No matter what punishment they imposed, he would never outrun the sight of Diane's terrified eyes in her last seconds. The jury deliberated for hours, weighing passion, betrayal, fear, the soldier's training, the holiness of a pastor turned flawed man, a wife turned unfaithful partner, and the finality of those gunshots. Ultimately, they returned with a verdict of second-degree murder, deciding that while it was intentional, it was not premeditated in the strict sense that would define first degree. The judge, an older man who had once served as a JAG officer in the Army himself, spoke at length about moral duty and the heartbreak of such betrayals. He acknowledged Michael's service but emphasized that a marriage vow broken does not justify 2 lives being taken. He handed down a lengthy prison sentence, ensuring Michael would not see freedom for decades. Diane's parents wept quietly. Pastor Daniel's widow, who had chosen to attend only the final day of trial, to close this chapter, lowered her head in silent, grief-stricken acceptance. And Michael himself stood there, staring at the floor, tears marking tracks down his cheeks as the bailiffs led him away. She believed in the sanctity of marriage. He believed in honor and fidelity. Yet neither belief survived that fateful night. In the weeks that followed the trial, the house where it happened was put up for sale. A for sale sign appeared in the yard, and potential buyers knew little of the tragedy beyond rumors. Fresh paint threatened to erase the bullet holes inside the bedroom walls. The unstoppable march of time does that. It tries to paper over the worst nights. People in the neighborhood still spoke of the crime sporadically, occasionally referencing it as a cautionary tale about the intensity of hidden secrets. The local church installed a new pastor, struggling to reconcile the memory of Daniel's leadership with the shocking affair that preceded his death. Some longtime congregants found themselves unable to return, the vision of those bullet-riddled silhouettes too haunting to shake. Others stayed, hoping to rebuild a sense of community and faith. In prison, Michael spent many days writing letters, some to Diane's parents, extending his profound apologies, some to his own mother, who lived in Austin and had no idea how to process her son's transformation from a disciplined soldier to a convicted murderer. He wrote diaries filled with internal debates, asking himself how love could birth both beauty and violence, how faith could be so easily exploited to hide wrongdoing. He repeated lines of self-admonition. "I should have walked away. I should have left the house. I should have put down the gun." Over and over, he recited these lines like a sorrowful prayer. For a time, he even turned to the prison chaplain, ironically seeking spiritual counsel, talking about questions he wishes he had asked Daniel while Daniel was alive. "Why didn't you respect the sanctity of my marriage if you were a pastor?" The chaplain could only listen, acknowledging that moral failings can occur in anyone, regardless of titles or positions of trust. Years might pass, and the shock to the community might subside. Yet some nights, especially those warm Texas nights, under a wide but eerily silent sky, people who remember still feel a chill. They recall the sudden burst of gunfire, the ominous swirl of flashing lights reflecting on the windows, the sickening realization that the soldier they welcomed home was carrying heartbreak in one hand and lethal force in the other. They reflect on how quickly a life built on trust can crumble when secrets are left unchecked. Was Diane solely to blame for seeking comfort in the arms of another man while Michael was away? Did duty and distance push her into that choice? Or was there a deeper longing in her heart that neither she nor Michael understood? Pastor Daniel, too, remains an enigma, a man entrusted with guiding souls but who fell to his own human temptations. Some call him a hypocrite. Others say it is only proof that spiritual leaders are just as vulnerable to failings as the rest of us. The tragedy becomes a layered story about betrayal, moral conflict, and irreversible decisions, not just for those involved, but for a community that witnessed how a single gunshot does not only claim the lives of the fallen, it ripples out, causing spiritual and emotional death in neighbors, families, and friends. Even the house, once a place of solace, turned into a silent testament to the brutality of heartbreak. Prospective buyers might never sense the echoes of that fateful night. But the walls remember. The hush after the final shot, the quickening footsteps in the hallway, and the quiet fall of tears that seeped into the carpets. Even now, in the penitentiary, Michael is described by guards as quiet, usually polite, someone who seldom talks unless spoken to. A counselor who sees him weekly tries to dig into the guilt still etched on his face. Sometimes Michael confesses to nightmares of that night, how the images of Diane and Daniel in bed burn themselves into his memory, and how every time he closes his eyes, he sees the muzzle flash again. He wonders if there can ever be redemption for a moment so fueled by wrath and sorrow. He finds himself repeating lines in his head. She believed in me. I believed in her. He believed in God. None of us believed this could happen. Some nights, that simple refrain becomes a lullaby of torment, a reminder that trust is fragile, that love that once seemed invincible can crack under the weight of distance and loneliness, and that forgiveness, if it ever exists, might be the hardest mercy to find. For the onlookers, the story is a tragic puzzle that keeps them morally inquisitive. They ask themselves, if I were in his shoes, would I have done the same? Or, was there a moment for Diane to repent and end the affair before Michael came home? Or, could the pastor, the man of the cloth, have resisted the temptation more strongly? These questions never find a simple answer. Real life rarely does. The complexity of it all continues to lurk in the corners of memory, an unresolved chord that echoes with the tension of heartbreak and the finality of violence. To watch the tombstones of Diane and Pastor Daniel side by side in the local cemetery is to watch two stories that ended in the same place, though they began so differently. She was a devoted wife who wrote letters to Michael in the early days of his deployment, letters he kept tucked in his vest on the front lines. He was a pastor known for kind words and uplifting sermons, leading food drives for the needy in Killeen. Now, a single act of violence bound their stories together forever. And Michael, the man who once pledged to protect them both, Diane as his wife, Daniel as a community leader, sits in a cell, haunted by a question with no resolution. If he had had even 5 more seconds of clear thought, might he have turned and walked away? Because in the end, no one emerges unscathed from an act of rage, not even the one pulling the trigger. As days slip into years, the tale of this Texas tragedy becomes the kind of cautionary story told in hushes and murmurs, sometimes repeated in local true crime segments on late-night television or the occasional documentary. Listeners feel the haunting weight of the moral lessons. That betrayal can strike at the heart of even the most sincere commitments, that spiritual leaders can betray the trust of their flock, and that returning soldiers, isolated by secrets and stress, can unravel in a moment if they stumble upon a nightmare too great to bear. Indeed, the quiet question that never goes away is whether Michael could have chosen mercy, should have stepped back from that threshold before pulling the trigger. But human hearts are not always carefully calibrated instruments of reason. In a swirl of heartbreak, fury, and humiliation, the average person can become someone unrecognizable. Even as the world moves on, as the wide Texas highways fill again each rush hour, as new families move into that neighborhood without knowledge of what transpired, the memory lingers in the cracks. Some nights, someone will drive by that old home and recall the sirens, the frantic phone calls, the detectives' clipped words. They might slow down, glancing at the yard where for sale signs once stood, and remember the hush that followed those gunshots on that warm summer night. And they might say a silent prayer that heartbreak never meets them at the door the way it did for Michael Harris. Because in the end, is there any heartbreak more devastating than realizing that the home you cherished, the partner you trusted, and the spiritual leader you respected could all converge in one single moment of betrayal, leaving you grasping for reason and redemption in a place where both are impossible to find? Far away, in a prison yard under a scorching Texas sun, Michael sometimes lifts his gaze toward the same sky that once gave him hope. Perhaps, beneath the dogged routine of prison life, there is a part of him that still wonders what might have been, what joys could have awaited him had he arrived to a faithful wife, had he not carried that weapon in the small hours of that fatal night. It is a question that draws no answers. He is left with the final truth that one cannot extinguish heartbreak with bullets without inviting greater tragedy. Those final moments replay in a quiet loop for him, the bedroom door swinging open, a fleeting glimpse of shock on Diane's face, the fractured voice of Pastor Daniel, and that single tug on the trigger that changed everything forever. He believed in fulfilling his duty, but he could not fulfill the one duty that mattered most, to rise above his anger and walk away. In the end, no matter how we parse right or wrong, we are left with a devastating reminder that love ends in tragedy if it isn't nurtured by honesty and restraint. And that is the saddest truth of all.